a 13-year-old boy, a witch hunter mentor, and a promise that can never be broken. In 2015, Hollywood turned this premise into a generic action movie that lost $85 million for its studio. But in the books, every decision Tom Ward makes comes at a cost, and darkness isn't defeated by swords, but through knowledge. This is the story the movie didn't dare to tell. Tom Ward was 13 when his father handed him over to the spook, the county's official protector against creatures of the dark. He was the seventh son of a seventh son, a requirement for inheriting the gift of sensing the supernatural. The spook arrived as the daylight faded. His father paid for a month-long trial without looking him in the eye. He simply handed Tom an old tinderbox, worn smooth by time and use. "Take it with you," he said. "You'll need it in the dark." That night, his mother, Ma'am, waited for him in the kitchen. There were no speeches. She simply rubbed the back of his neck with her thumbs, the same gesture she had used since he was a child. "You can't stay here," she told him. "You're the seventh son of a seventh son. You have a job to do." Tom nodded. Fear tightened in his chest, but he also felt a quiet sense of relief. The farm had already started to feel too small for him. At dawn, as he stepped across the threshold with his bundle over his shoulder, his father placed a hand on him. "It's a new life, son." The first test took place in an abandoned house in Horshaw. The spook ordered him to spend the night there alone and go down into the cellar at midnight to see whether he could master fear before facing real supernatural threats. He left him with one clear rule: darkness feeds on fear. The air turned freezing cold, and invisible boots began climbing the stairs. Tom heard heavy breathing, while a voice identical to his mother's begged to be let inside. He remembered the warning and stayed calm. When the clock struck 12, he took his candle and headed downstairs. "Someone has to do it. Might as well be me," he muttered. His master was waiting below. His apprenticeship began at the house in Chippenden, where the spook showed him 3 gardens separated by hedges. The first contained graves secured with iron bars. The second concealed a boggart, an earthbound spirit chained beneath a stone slab to prevent it from harming anyone. The third was simply a peaceful refuge. Tom quickly understood that his job was to protect ordinary people. The lessons came fast, and all the writing made his hand ache. He also learned to distrust witches and girls with pointed shoes, a telltale sign of witch blood in that part of the world. That same day, Tom went down to the village carrying the spook's sack of supplies. A group of boys followed him and cornered him on the road. They wanted to take the provisions by force. Alice stepped out from the trees and scattered them with a single warning. In return, she demanded a favor. Tom agreed without thinking of the consequences, unaware that in the county, a freely given promise became an unbreakable bond. A few days later, Alice handed him 3 damp, nearly black cakes. They were meant for Mother Malkin, a witch imprisoned in the pit. Tom hesitated when he took the basket, but his promise weighed heavier than his fear. He went down to the garden at midnight and dropped the first cake through the iron bars. The smell of blood and raw meat turned his stomach. From the depths of the pit came a wet, frantic sound. The witch had begun to eat. Meanwhile, a trap lured the spook away to Pendle, a mountain east of the county known as Witch Territory. The false report of disturbances had been carefully planned to leave the apprentice without protection. Tom realized too late that he had been manipulated. The distance to Pendle meant no one could get back in time if anything went wrong. His naivety came at a terrible cost. The cakes restored the prisoner's strength, and the iron bars bent beneath her growing power. The witch escaped from the pit before dawn. She left a silver trail across the grass, the mark dark magic left behind, and slithered toward the river. Tom grabbed a staff and ran after her. He knew the danger was moving fast, and there was no one else to stop it. The confrontation by the water was brutal. Mother Malkin looked like a black stain with ember-red eyes and tried to drag him under with her freezing hands. Tom didn't run. He struck her with a rowan staff, wood deadly to witches, and forced her toward the current, knowing that flowing water weakened them on contact. She clung desperately to the riverbank. Tom drove the staff into her again and again until the current finally swept her away. Then he collapsed to his knees, sick with terror. But he had bought precious time. The calm that followed was an illusion. Bony Lizzie and the giant Tusk, Mother Malkin's granddaughter and son, captured him in the woods. They threw him into a pit and forced him to drink a poison that twisted reality. The dead seemed to crawl closer, and worms writhed through the earth. But it was all an illusion designed to break his mind. Alice appeared at the edge of the pit and pulled him free. They ran until sunrise. The spook was waiting on a hill with a silver chain and drove their pursuers back. But evil followed Tom all the way to his family's farm. The river had softened the witch's body, allowing her spirit to seep through cracks and crevices. A dark trail ended beneath Alice's window, where the spook had sent her so that Tom's mother could judge her and decide her fate. Every night, Alice spoke to the mirror, and every night an old face stared back at her from the glass. Tom smashed the mirror with a blow. The witch immediately leaped into the body of Snout, the butcher who had arrived at the farm. Using the man's strength and his knife, she seized Ellie's newborn daughter. The baby was only 6 days old. Tom realized there was no time left, and while his family slept, unaware of the danger, he alone stood between the butcher and the newborn child. He threw salt and iron filings into the man's face, the only mixture capable of burning dark spirits and forcing them out of a human body. The iron drained the spirit's strength, and the salt scorched it. The witch tried to escape through the pigsty. The hungry pigs devoured her before she could disappear. The spook arrived shortly afterward and confirmed that the danger had passed. The animals had consumed every cursed remnant, breaking the spell completely. Tom finally breathed easier, though he knew his journey was only beginning. Alice's future now rested in his hands. The spook offered him a clear choice. He could send her to the pit or place her with an aunt on the coast. Tom remembered the broken promise and the scars on the girl's arm. She had been a victim too, so the old master decided to give her a chance. They walked toward the coast and said goodbye beside a gray river. Tom returned to Chipenden, hung up his cloak, and resumed the routine of an apprentice. But the spook had already started counting the days. The cold lingered longer than it should, and without Tom realizing it, the first link in the chain that would drag him toward his greatest trial had already come loose. Alice knew she had to act. The High Inquisitor, a witch hunter who burned innocent people for power and profit, had captured the spook after being betrayed by a close relative, a priest who sold his loyalty out of fear. So while Tom slept exhausted in the cellar, Alice stole the special key from his pocket, the one Andrew, the spook's locksmith brother, had forged to open the silver gate. She quietly made her way down into the catacombs and turned the key in the lock. The seal that held the Bane captive, an ancient spirit that fed on blood and corrupted human minds, gave way with a sharp crack. Alice offered her blood to the creature in exchange for power. The Bane accepted the bargain. 3 times it would drink from her, and 3 times it would obey her commands. Dark power surged through her like a bolt of lightning. Hours later, on Wortham Hill, the Inquisitor was preparing the bonfires. The spook stood bound to the central stake, weakened by torture and condemned to die. His crime, fighting the darkness. Alice stepped in front of the flames and spun on her heels. She spat toward the sky, her fingers stained with blood, and the storm answered instantly. A furious gale knocked the Inquisitor to the ground and scattered the burning embers. Tom ran through the smoke and cut the ropes. They escaped into the moors. The Bane was now free, and Alice had bound it to her will. Through that connection, the spirit could track them wherever they went. On the very first night, it attacked the spook's house with a raging wind, testing its strength. Windows shattered, and the roof groaned under the assault. The old master realized time was running out. If the Bane recovered its full power, it would become unstoppable. They followed its trail to the cliffs of Heysham. There, among gravestones carved into the rock, they searched for the ghost of an ancient guardian, the only man who had ever managed to imprison the beast. The spirit rose before them and revealed the secret. A silver blade had to pierce the Bane's heart, but whoever delivered the killing blow would die as well. The spook ordered them to flee. Tom refused. He remembered the sealed letter his mother had given him before he left home. He opened it beneath the rain and read the warning. The future will demand a sacrifice. Driven by those words, he ran to the abandoned house beside the cathedral, used a key to unlock the wine cellar hatch, and descended into the catacombs. He followed the left passageway as it spiraled downward, and the air grew icy cold. At the deepest point, in the burial chamber where the ancient guardian had once imprisoned the Bane, he found his master and Alice. The Bane descended like a black cloud before taking on a scaled form. The spook threw his silver chain, but Alice stepped into its path, and the attack missed. The Bane roared and with a swift motion dragged Alice upward. Both vanished into the darkness of the shaft above. Tom didn't hesitate. He grabbed the chain and began climbing. The cold metal sliced into his hands. He climbed toward the upper chamber, where the air was thick and smelled of old smoke. There, in the shadows, the Bane was drinking Alice's blood. It was the third time. If it finished, she would belong to it forever. Fear made Tom tremble, but when he remembered his mother's letter and accepted whatever sacrifice might be required, calm returned. He drew the silver blade hidden inside the broken half of the staff hanging from his belt and hurled himself at the Bane with all his strength. His first strike missed its mark and failed to reach the creature's heart, but after trapping it with the silver chain, he managed to drive the blade into its heart on the third attempt. A blast of energy hurled him across the chamber. Everything went black. Tom opened his eyes beneath the rain. Alice was gripping his arm, and the spook stared at him in disbelief. The creature was dead. Alice confessed her secret. Before the Bane could take its final drink, she had bargained for both Tom's and the spook's freedom. Her only request had been that master and apprentice leave alive. The spook carried Alice toward the pit without a word. Anger marked every step he took, but it was more than anger. It was the weight of a duty that demanded he imprison her to save the county. Alice had given her blood to the Bane, and the pact bound her to the creature forever. If her powers were allowed to grow unchecked, the Bane would see through her eyes and read her thoughts. Darkness would spread across the entire land. The pit was the only reliable way to contain her. Tom ran after them and shouted the truth he had discovered in the spook's journal. Years earlier, the spook had captured a witch named Meg. Duty demanded that she be imprisoned, but he had spared her because he loved her. The spook stopped at the edge of the pit. Those words stopped him in his tracks. He remembered his own past and decided that Alice would not be condemned to darkness. Carefully, he lowered her back to the ground. The Bane had been defeated. Alice was breathing freely once more in Chippenden, and Tom had proven he was ready for whatever came next. But the spook took no comfort in the victory. Something in his eyes suggested that the hardest battle had not yet begun. Was Tom truly prepared to face the secret his master refused to reveal? November's chill settled over Chippenden. Tom Ward knew the season would change everything. His master decided to move to an isolated refuge in the Anglezarka marshes. Alice would not be coming with them. The spook had already arranged her future. The Hursts, a farming couple, had agreed to take her in, and in return he would forgive an outstanding debt they owed him. For Tom, the separation meant fewer distractions and a greater focus on his training. For Alice, it marked the beginning of a stay she had never chosen. The weight of goodbye lingered in the air. The sound of the warning bell shattered the calm in the kitchen. Tom stepped outside, and a hooded man handed him a sealed letter addressed to John Gregory, his master, before vanishing into the falling snow. The spook opened it by the fire, read its contents, hardened his expression, and threw it into the flames. The sender was Morgan, a former apprentice who had abandoned the trade and now returned demanding a book of rituals the spook had confiscated years earlier. Morgan wanted the book to summon Golgoth, the Lord of Winter, an ancient force sleeping beneath the burial mound. If he succeeded in freeing it, winter might never end. But the spook had already altered a crucial word in the copy. If Morgan attempted the ritual, the magic would destroy him instead. The master had already made up his mind. The journey to the marsh was exhausting because the landscape grew harsher with every step. The winter house looked more like a prison than a home. It had no garden and no natural light, only a deep, damp cellar beneath the floorboards. There, Tom discovered iron cages and sealed graves. 2 witches lived imprisoned in the darkness. One was Meg. The other was her blood sister, already transformed into a wild and uncontrollable creature that required constant supervision. Every morning, the spook gave Meg a special herbal brew. The drink erased her memories and kept her docile. Tom realized that his master was protecting the woman he loved, while also keeping her imprisoned for everyone's safety. On the way to the marsh, Tom stopped at his family's farm. His father was fading, and there was no sign of recovery. The house smelled of damp timber and cold ashes. His mother led him upstairs. His father lay propped up on 4 pillows, his face gray and covered in cold sweat. The air felt heavy. It carried the scent of dying flowers, the sweet, lingering fragrance that often heralds death. Ma'am whispered that it was a sign, but he said nothing. He simply looked at his son. "Are you working hard?" he asked in a hoarse voice. "Your master? Is he pleased with you?" Tom nodded, feeling a knot tighten in his throat. He leaned forward and kissed him on the forehead. His skin was hot and damp. "Get well soon, Dad," he whispered. "I'll come back in the spring." His father's eyes flew open. For a moment, the exhaustion vanished. "Tom," he said, "is that you?" A violent cough doubled him over before he could say anything more. Ma'am gently guided Tom away. "Let him rest," she said. "He doesn't have the strength anymore." Tom walked downstairs with heavy steps. He knew he would never see both of them together again. The journey back confronted him with an even harsher reality. Snow trapped Alice at the Hurst farm, and a stone-throwing boggart attacked the property. The spook had been badly injured fighting the creature. Alice managed to reach them and used her knowledge of potions to save his life. The tension inside the house grew with every passing hour as the snow cut them off from the outside world. Morgan intercepted Tom in an abandoned chapel. He was waiting alone. Alice had already been sent to another farm, and the spook was bedridden with illness. Morgan claimed to be the spook's son and displayed a power that chilled Tom to the bone. He revealed that Tom's father was trapped in limbo, condemned to eternal suffering, and demanded the hidden grimoire from the attic desk in exchange. To buy time and consult his master, Tom pretended to accept the bargain and returned carrying the weight of that terrible choice. His master rested in a weakened state. Tom prepared Meg's usual herbal brew, the same drink that erased her memories every morning, but she had already begun remembering her past and recognized the deception. Meg smashed the cup against the floor, regained her former strength, and used that fury to drag Tom downstairs. She locked him inside a cellar cell alongside the unconscious spook. Tom barely managed to escape, but he went back upstairs because he still needed the grimoire. The spook awoke and discovered the betrayal. Tom confessed everything in shame. His master denied being Morgan's father. Morgan stole the grimoire and fled toward the ancient burial mound, the only altar capable of summoning Golgoth because it stood at the crossing point of powerful magical lines. Morgan ambushed Tom, knocked him unconscious, and dragged him bound to the mound. He was using Tom as bait because without a living human presence, the ritual would fail. Snow covered the marsh, the earth trembled beneath their feet, and the air felt sharp as broken glass. Fear nearly paralyzed the young apprentice, but the memory of his father kept him standing. Golgoth answered the call. The Lord of Winter emerged with an endless hunger for ice, and Morgan froze solid before shattering into pieces inside the protective circle. The creature then turned its attention to Tom. It offered him freedom in exchange for extinguishing one of the 5 candles protecting the circle. If even one candle went out, the barrier would break. The entity would enter the county, and nothing would be able to stop it. Tom felt the cold biting through his skin and into his bones. He thought of his mother, and of the land he had sworn to protect. In a steady voice, he refused the offer. He chose oblivion rather than condemn the county to ruin. His refusal kept the magical barrier intact, and the entity faded back into the darkness. Meg and her wild sister appeared, cut Tom's bonds, and guided him to the surface. The spook was waiting at the entrance. Together, they sealed Morgan's tomb beneath a heavy stone slab. Winter finally gave way to spring. The master accompanied Meg and her sister to the harbor. There, he said goodbye as they prepared to return to their homeland. Their exile in the marsh had served its purpose, and the time had come for each of them to continue their lives free of old chains. Alice returned to Chippenden, and the spook brought her back so she could train alongside Tom. The letter from Jack announcing Tom's father's death arrived too late. "He died last week. We didn't wait for you." Tom returned to the farm. Jack pulled a ring of keys from his pocket and set it on the table. There were 4 in total, 1 large key for the door and 3 smaller ones for the chests. "They're yours," he said. "Dad left them to you in his will." Tom looked at them but did not pick them up. Instead, he pushed them back toward his brother. "Keep them," he murmured. "I won't use them until I've spoken to Ma'am." Jack nodded and slipped them back into his pocket. The farm felt emptier than ever. Tom knew it was time to leave, but waiting still held him there. Ma'am returned several days later. Without saying a word, she climbed the stairs and led them to the locked door beneath the attic. She turned her own key, pushed the door open, and let them enter. The air inside was warm. It smelled of dried lavender and aged wood. Ma'am turned toward him and calmly handed over the ring of keys. "They're yours now," she said. "Don't give them to anyone, not even Jack. Keep them with you at all times." Tom closed his fingers around the cold metal. The weight in his palm suddenly felt very real. "Once you close that door, no evil can enter," Ma'am continued. "If you are brave and your soul is pure, this room will be a refuge, better protected than your master's house, but only use it when your life and soul are in real danger." She paused and fixed him with a steady gaze. "There is a price. If someone whose power is already fading crosses that threshold, the room will consume them. That's why your master can never use it. But you and Alice are young. You'll survive." Tom said nothing. He simply tucked the keys against his chest. That afternoon, Tom climbed Hangman's Hill. Snow covered the fresh earth. He knelt before the wooden cross. "Dad!" he shouted toward the trees. "Are you there?" No ghost rose from the ground. No voice called back to him. Tom closed his eyes and prayed for his father's peace. It was the only gift he could still offer. But at least, with Morgan's fall, his father's spirit could finally rest in silence. The next day, Ma'am lit a bonfire on the hilltop. Tom begged her to stay. "The county needs you. I need you." She shook her head. "Time is moving too fast. Darkness is growing in Greece, and I have an old debt to settle there." She wiped away a tear with her thumb. "If you accomplish what I hope you will, others will say your life was worthwhile, even if you never believe it yourself." She embraced him one last time. The kiss on his cheek lingered like a brand. When the cart disappeared into the mist, Tom realized his childhood was over. He was no longer the boy who always returned home. He was an apprentice who had to move forward on his own. Morgan was dead, and the county could breathe again. But Tom knew the peace would not last, because the spook carried a burden he had shared with no one. His time was running out. And before it did, there was one final thing he had to do. Pendle awaited them in the west, the heart of witch territory and the most dangerous place in the county. And this time, there would be no way to avoid it. Tom was training in the garden when Alice, playing the role of a witch, charged at him through the trees. It was practice for what was coming. In Pendle, the clans were no longer fighting among themselves. They were beginning to form an alliance. Everything pointed toward Lammas, the night of August 1st. On that night, the veil between worlds became as thin as paper. If the witches completed the ritual, they would open a gateway for the fiend. It was no myth. It was evil given form, and if it crossed over, the county would have no hope of escape. Time was running out. Alice and Tom knew it, and failure was not an option. But the blow came before they could prepare. When Tom reached the farm, black smoke blotted out the sun, and the barn was nothing more than ashes. On the wall beside the door, there was blood. The witches had kidnapped his family and taken all 3 of his mother's chests intact. They wanted the keys hanging around Tom's neck, and they would use Jack, Ellie, and little Mary to get them. Alice refused to wait and headed alone into enemy territory while Tom ran to find help. Along the way, fog swallowed the road, and they encountered Father Stocks, an old friend of the spook. What they didn't know was that the Mold Heel witches were watching them. They didn't attack with brute force. They used mirrors and deception. Tom followed a young witch who swore that Alice was in danger, but it was a trap. Mab and her 2 twin sisters immobilized him with a spell. The spell's weakness doubled him over until a sudden burning sensation shot through his forearm. The scars Alice had left there, a protective mark, flared like a glowing seal, shattered the spell, and restored his strength. With his strength restored, Tom didn't hesitate. He followed Mab to an isolated cottage and found Alice imprisoned in a cellar surrounded by mirrors. The mold heels had bound her with magic. He used his special key to unlock the chains, but the true bond was a lock of her hair that Mab kept as leverage. Only when Tom burned the lock of hair in a candle flame was Alice finally able to breathe freely again and recover her strength. Mab approached the county gunners who were laying siege to Malkin Tower. The magistrate had sent them to rescue Tom's family, who had been taken by the Malkin witches. Cannon fire pounded the stone walls, trying to blast open a breach. But Mab had plans of her own. She poured a potion into the guards' water supply, keeping them unconscious until dawn. She wasn't acting out of mercy. She simply needed more time to put her plan into motion. Beneath the moonlight, she pointed Tom and Alice toward a hidden entrance among the rubble that led directly down to the cells. In exchange for guiding them, she demanded the 3 keys. Tom clutched them tightly against his chest, realizing he had no choice if he wanted to save Jack, Ellie, and the child. The tunnel smelled of damp earth and death. When they reached the 3rd chest, Tom turned the key and the lock gave way. There was no gold inside. Instead, 2 winged creatures wrapped in canvas lay sleeping within. They were his mother's Lamia sisters, dormant for years. The cold light awakened them. Their black wings scraped against the ceiling, and with a low, terrifying shriek, they descended upon the fleeing mold-heel witches. The tunnel erupted into a bloodbath, and chaos erupted throughout the passage. While the creatures attacked, the spook and James, Tom's older brother, finally arrived. But Wurmalde had already vanished. The magistrate's supposed housekeeper was not human at all. She was a witch who controlled the mind of the most powerful man in the region and had been orchestrating the alliance of the clans from the shadows. Wurmalde never left any loose ends. Father Stocks had spent weeks gathering villagers to resist the witches, and that could not be allowed to continue. She poisoned him quietly and patiently, waiting for the moment his body finally gave out. When the priest collapsed, a creature born of dark magic finished the job, draining the life from him. Then Wurmalde drove a dagger into his chest and erased all traces of her involvement. A good man was dead, nobody knew it yet, and Tom had just become the most wanted murderer in the county. But the spook refused to let the lie stand. He pieced together the truth and brought it back to the village. The death of a good man became the spark the villagers needed. Villagers stopped hiding behind their curtains, grabbed torches, followed the spook to the hill, and declared war. The witches were waiting for them, armed and ready. They stood in tight ranks, armed with knives and hooks, prepared for slaughter. The clash was brutal. Out of the darkness, the Lamias descended upon them and shattered the enemy lines. Wurmalde used the chaos to escape through the thunderstorm. But it was already too late. The Lammas ritual had been completed. The witches opened a portal in the rock, and the fiend crossed into the mortal world. Tom ran toward the farm. The sky turned crimson, and heavy footsteps echoed behind him. It wasn't the fiend. It was Grimalkin, the clan's hired assassin. The Malkins had sent her to collect the debt owed for the broken bargain with Mab. Tom knew he couldn't defeat her in a direct fight, so he pretended to surrender. He took a step toward her, and at the last possible moment, switched his staff into his left hand. The silver blade pierced the assassin's shoulder and pinned her against a rowan tree. The cursed wood burned her on contact, and the pain left her helpless. Tom never looked back. He crossed the yard, rushed upstairs, and turned the key in the door to his mother's room. Once it shut, only silence remained. But the fiend was already outside. It battered the walls of the farmhouse with primal fury, desperate to get in. The room kept it out, but the darkness found another path inside. Tom's mind, illusions and whispers filled the chamber. They showed him nightmares, telling him that his struggle was pointless and that his life meant nothing. All of it was meant to drive him into opening the door in despair. In the middle of that invisible assault, a faint light appeared in the corner. It was the ghost of Father Stocks, trapped between worlds and burdened by guilt for failing to recognize Wurmalde in time. Tom didn't back away. He approached the spirit, reminded him of a moment of peace, and helped him let go of the weight of his mistakes. The priest smiled, faded away, and with him the spell of despair was broken. Tom's will remained unshaken. His mother's protective enchantment held firm, and with the coming of dawn, the supernatural storm faded into calm. The blood moon disappeared, and the ice melted away. Tom had survived. The spook and Alice arrived as the smoke began to clear. The farm was broken, but it was still standing. Beneath a clear sky, Tom turned 14 years old. The fiend still roamed free, and the witches would soon regroup. Tom gathered his memories, adjusted his gear, and looked down the road ahead. There was no time left to mourn what had been lost. The only thing left was to keep moving forward. This series spans a huge number of books, making it nearly impossible to cover everything in a single video. That's why we decided to focus on the main saga, the beginning of Tom's journey into this world. But let me know in the comments if you'd like to see the complete saga covered. If enough of you are interested, we might turn the rest of the saga into a full series of videos. And as always, if you enjoy this kind of content, remember that the best way to support the channel is by leaving a like and subscribing. See you in the next video.